episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really fascinating guest today who is helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us on many different fronts. We are headed on our virtual road trip again, as we like to say. We are headed up to Canada today, and we are meeting with Fanny C., who is the One Roche Head of Artificial Intelligence and Digital Health at Hoffmann-La. And for those less familiar with the pharmaceutical industry, Hoffmann-La is a multinational healthcare company. They operate both in pharmaceuticals and diagnostic segments. And I was just taking a look at the top 10 list the other day, but in 2021, it is the world's largest pharmaceutical company by revenue. With her bachelor's and master's from University of Toronto, Ms. C is very focused on all sorts of applications of digital health, as well as innovative techniques like artificial intelligence to ultimately help generate actionable insights for exponential improvements, both in patient outcomes as well as economic development in the area. Ms. C has over 15 years of experience bringing new products and services to the healthcare market, including extensive experience as a clinician, researcher, and business development professional in the areas of medical devices, AI analytics, and digital health assets. And she specializes in ultimately building meaningful and impactful health system transformation, leveraging innovation, and ultimately achieving fast, sustainable growth for the company, for entrepreneurs and multinationals in both public and private sectors. And they do a lot in the public-private partnership space, which we'll get into as well. But we're really glad to have her today. Ms. Fanny C., thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you so much, Ira, for having me.
It's great having you. I'd love to start off, as we typically do, by giving you the floor for a little bit to talk a little bit more about yourself and sort of not just sort of where you grew up and a little bit about your background education, but you have a very interesting, what I'll call pre-Roche journey. You were spending time at Canada Health Infoway, developing digital health across the country. You were involved in building this fascinating project I was looking at called Blue Dot back in 2013, tracking not just COVID, but Ebola and Zika and things like that. Take us on a little of that pre-Roche journey, if you would.
I think all of my journey stems from the clinic. I started off as a radiation therapist, was bedside for about 8-9 years, treating cancer patients and specializing in everything from the clavicles up, so head and neck and CNS, and then also to other parts of the body, such as the prostate, breast, liver. And when I looked out into the world, I saw a number of press releases and academic publications that didn't necessarily reflect what was happening in the clinic. I always think clinical people are so entrepreneurial in themselves. They can make a piece of tape, do anything, be anything, and solve anything. But it'd be nice with all these advances in technology and innovation to be able to absorb that into the clinic and being able to breed meaningful impact to our care plans and to overall benefit in patients. And so part of my journey was trying to figure out where the problems were. Like, how come we have this wealth of innovation, but not necessarily the scalability that we assume that it should have if it's something that's beneficial in the clinic? And so I kind of traversed into the world of business, trying to understand if it was the contract structure, if it was IP, if it was the way that the deals were created. And so I went to business school. But when I came out of business school, I realized that I knew business words, but I didn't actually understand business. And so what I did is I ended up working for Mars Discovery District in a group called Mars Innovation. And we were the central hub for intellectual property for a number of the academic institutes, universities, and research institutes within the Greater Toronto area. And for about 6 or 7 years is basically looking at all the different inventions coming out of these phenomenal academic centers. And when you think in your head, it'd be nice if this type of invention existed. I can tell you, given all of what I've seen, it does exist. It just hasn't either been productized or it hasn't been translated into the market. So we are sitting on a wealth of phenomenal minds. And I feel like it's part of our accountability and our ethical responsibility to identify the ones that are important and spend the time to implement them and adopt them into medical practice. And so, my route to a diagnostics company and then into InfoWay was really about learning more about the different sectors and figuring out where the challenges existed. And I think, you know, what I found is both in the public and private sector, everybody counts. It's not one specific player that is the make or break for any adoption of any emerging technology. It is really the coordinated effort of all those organizations that actually makes a product reach the market to something meaningful. And I think Roche is, you know, very much an advocate of this philosophy and is very much about collaboration in the long term and building learning healthcare systems such that we can embrace a particular challenge as a group and then determine the different tactics that are feasible such that the whole system embraces it in a sustainable manner so that we can get innovations to patients. And I think I'm very proud of the company because of that.
Yeah, and that collaborative sort of ecosystem model, I think it shines through, and we'll be getting into some of the examples of the different areas that you're working in at Roche. You know, I find it really fascinating. I mean, I'm talking to you now. You head up this artificial intelligence center of excellence. You're located in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada. I spent a little time in Canada. I was unaware of sort of the exceptional system that you have up there in terms of technologies like artificial intelligence. Just give us a little background, just in terms of why Canada. What's been going on in terms of artificial intelligence, digital health ecosystem? I know there was a lot happening at University of Toronto. Take us through a little bit about the last several years of sort of the work that's been going up there, sort of in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. And I think a lot of people say, why Canada? Artificial intelligence is everywhere, and there are scientists and bright people everywhere. And I think it's just this overall unified investment into artificial intelligence by both the federal and provincial governments. And so we have luminaries such as Jeffrey Hinton, Yoshua Bengio, and Richard Sutton, who are arguably the godfathers of deep learning, as well as reinforcement learning, that live on our soil, but also have created these phenomenal research institutes called Vector, Mila, and Amy that are able to represent and grow the capabilities and the research projects and the skill sets of these workers of tomorrow. They are people who are at the cutting edge of the science. And we also have a very collaborative public and private system such that we are able to organize around particular challenges and mandates in a way where we're able to take that science and determine how to mobilize it within each organization so that we can be more efficient as a healthcare system. So there's this overall sort of financial investment from the federal and provincial government. There's also this willingness from the scientific community, but also industry and the public sector to spend the time to figure out how we can reach that healthcare system of tomorrow in terms of determining how to implement these in a safe way.
And along those lines, before we get into some of the Roche AI Center of Excellence projects, talk a little bit about the term One Roche, because I saw you give a presentation recently about that, and I think it's extremely important, sort of how companies like Roche are redefining themselves. You know, we think of, okay, pharmaceutical company, you're the largest pharma company in the world. You do a little bit more than that. It's not just about, hey, this drug or this diagnostic test. It's about really complex solutions working in these networks. Talk a little about the meaning of One Roche, if you would.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And when you think about it from, let's say, a corporate structure perspective, it just means that the diagnostic house and the pharma house are separate entities from a corporate standpoint. However, its meaning is much greater in that we are not just focusing on therapies and diagnostics and those two very distinct points within the patient experience or the patient journey. We are now looking at the patient experience in a more holistic fashion. What happens pre-diagnosis? What happens during diagnosis, treatment, during survivorship, and also end-of-life care? And that entire experience gives us the opportunity to provide impact whether we are able to provide it with our own products and services or to partner such that we were able to provide that more holistic bundled package or market offering to a patient or to a healthcare system. So we often talk about it in terms of integrated solutions, but to have a smooth patient journey, it might be to have, let's say, a pre-screening test for something or a condition that you may be predisposed to, and then being able to access the appropriate diagnostic device, and then having it appropriately tell you which particular therapy that you would have the best outcomes with, and then following that, monitoring for any sort of regression or any sort of progress in the condition such that you can get treatment if needed. And so that is the type of holistic health solutions type of company that we want to be and that we're striving to be. So these roles are about having that holistic view in the business that we carry out and the engagements that we carry out.
Excellent. Excellent. I really find it refreshing, myself having come out of big pharma at one time in my career, to see the transformation that's occurring even at this level of the industry, and it's really exciting. So, okay, now, so coming back to you, you head up the Roche AI Center of Excellence. You have, as you mentioned, these broad groups of like-minded public and private organizations. It's broadly called the Roche Data Science Coalition. Let's go into a couple of these projects. I really think they're fascinating, and obviously the one we have to start with is the Roche COVID-19 Data Science Coalition. You've brought together in your coalition Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, NVIDIA. We've had folks on the show, the Vector Institute. Talk a little bit about what you're up to on the COVID-19 front with this collaboration.
It was a phenomenal experience. I think, when COVID started, everybody had a bit of a panic attack. Everyone was basically saying, this can't be real. This is not happening. I'm living on a Netflix show and this isn't really happening. This is just us taking a bit of a break from traveling and not having to do expense reports, because in 2 to 3 weeks, this is going to go away. And then all of a sudden, 4 weeks later, 1 month later, 2 months later, 3 months later, and we're like, this is still here. This is not going away. And this is a big deal. And so what it came down to was calling on people within the network saying, we don't have the answer. There is no perfect roadmap. What are we going to do collectively? How can we share our expertise and coordinate our efforts such that we can get the treatments, the knowledge to people who can action it and care for the people who are getting sick? And so that is the coalition of organizations that came together under the Roche Data Science Coalition. It included academic and private partners such as NVIDIA and RGA, Amy and Vector. And we were able to essentially, and Think DataWorks and Self-Care Catalyst, they were phenomenal in creating a pipeline of data aggregation and data centralization to data solutioners, to then a group of people who would then mobilize insights to pandemic task forces all over the world such that they could make informed decisions. And so it was the first time I had actually seen companies coordinate in that way. And I've seen companies coordinate in a way where, you're applying for a particular grant, you're working on a particular initiative, but this was sort of in a skunkworks fashion where people were immediately getting together and saying, I fulfill this part of the pipeline, I fulfill this part of the pipeline, I fulfill this part of the pipeline. And because of that, we were able to aggregate open data sets around COVID-19 and have solutions generated on the Kaggle platform. I think over 100 solutions in the form of AI algorithms, advanced analytics, insights, dashboards, reports within 4 to 8 weeks. And those were disseminated through our pandemic task force, which were able to inform government groups around the world on social distancing policies, on reopening practices, on general decision-making. And one of the things that we thought was really interesting was just people were bringing different sources of data to one another at these tables. And it was really nice to be able to either confirm or reject the data that you had. So it's like, that's what we're seeing. And then they relied on each other as a group, as a source of truth. And that, I think, is truly innovation. It's not the innovation anymore where it's like, okay, you have all the time in the world, let's hypothesize a product, let's figure this out, let's find some clients. To me, the most exciting ones are the ones that are focused on human capabilities. We bring a whole bunch of people who are really smart to the table, and we say, this is our problem. What can we do to resolve it? What are the different tactics that we can try? And it's very mission and mandate focused, as opposed to, you know, this is a very specific question with a very specific data set and a very specific, you know, timeline.
Yep.
It was very collaborative. Yeah.
And, you know, a wonderful example, and this is one that has really, like a lot of, well, not a lot of diseases, but this one has really given the pharma industry and the biotech industry problems for decades now, and that's of course ALS. And you know, you put together this initiative, the End ALS Challenge, and here once again speaking about the collaborations: ALS Society Canada, Ontario Brain Institute, Netromark Corporation, and once again here you're really looking at it's sort of a competition in certain ways, bringing together AI, the neuroscience community, and looking at this disease, which once again has flummoxed the entire industry for a long time. Are there new ways we can do this, whether it's the treatment, the biology, the diagnosis, drug discovery? Talk a little bit about the End ALS Challenge.
Happy to. And another group of stakeholders that are inspirational and motivational and very much mission and mandate focused. Part of the reason why we built AI with Roche, or the AI Center of Excellence, was to be able to repeat the COVID-19 model of engagement in other therapeutic areas. We were saying, you know, if this is able to expedite discovery and able to mobilize knowledge in a very quick manner, then why not do this in other therapeutic areas like oncology and rare condition and neuroscience? And so as we were having these discussions, we had a phone call by one of my colleagues, Antoinette Vladimira, and also Indu Navar, who had recently lost her husband to ALS. They are both tech entrepreneurs, and they understood the importance of the intersection between technology and medicine. They saw what we had done in terms of bringing people together in COVID-19, and Indu had said she was working with her foundation that she created called Everything ALS, as well as another foundation patient advocacy group called Answer ALS, who had a longitudinal data set of both genomic and phenotypic data. And they were saying, how can we create an open innovation challenge such that we can bring the smartest people to the table to solution around new biomarkers for diagnosis, as well as new targets for drug discovery. And so we said, we're happy to help, and we don't know what this will bring, and we're not exactly sure who will show up at the party, but we're going to throw it. And so we worked with Kaggle again to make this data set available to all of the different stakeholders in the open environment, so the Kaggle platform, as well as our AI institutes. And, you know, of course, the number one thing, or the great thing about this particular initiative is it was a result of proactively consented patients who wanted to contribute to research, who wanted to share their data with research in this very transparent manner. And we thank, you know, Answer ALS for having the foresight and just doing all the heavy lifting to get that data to solutioners. So we presented that data on the Kaggle platform, and then we were able to, within 4 to 8 weeks, generate about 50 solutions. And the top 3 solutions came from one, a staff scientist at Illumina,
Okay.
A second scientist from a group of scientists from a startup company called Bowhead Health, and then a group of academics from the Technological University of Munich, as well as UC Irvine, who had come up with a novel way of looking at the data. And it just so happened that, you know, a ton of people were able to participate, but it was people who were in or participating within this competition. They were doing it on their free time. They were doing it because they were passionate. They were doing it because they wanted to provide impact. And we're finding that a lot of the people who are involved in these coalitions are looking for channels of impact. And that's another reason why we've created these types of challenges. So what we did is we brought them in front of a scientific community, which included the stakeholders involved in everything ALS and Answer ALS. And so that included, you know, Johns Hopkins, MGH, Gladstone, JHU, and people were just looking at the data and saying, you know, how can we validate this even further? And, you know, people were thinking of ways to decrease barriers for other people. They're just like, oh, I can help with that. Oh, you need validation there, I can help with that. Or maybe we have, you know, some hardware or some programs that can help with this. And then we had another forum where we brought in industry, and it was, you know, it was NVIDIA, it was Illumina, GE, ourselves, as well as a wealth of venture capitalists. So Google X, Google Ventures, Practical Ventures, Radical Ventures. And we were thinking which are the ones that the community has validated that we could potentially move forward and scale and co-invest as a group. And so it's a pipeline that exists right now, but this is just more of a coordinated effort to do that, such that, you know, it's not just word of mouth that you're bringing in people to respective initiatives. It's more like everybody knows where they play within the pipeline and what part they can participate in. And so, you know, right now we are still evaluating those technologies and really looking to see how we could further validation and potentially co-invest in these types of solutions. So yeah, it's been a fantastic journey, and we intend to do the same thing in rare condition, and you'll see a number of announcements that will come out this year that will allude to how we plan to do that, but particularly in neurodegeneration.
Excellent. Excellent. You know, Fanny, the other announcement that your organization made recently, and I really find this refreshing as well, was this scholarship in artificial intelligence and population health together with Innovative Medicines Canada, where, you know, you're looking ultimately to look at master's or PhD students and only immerse them in these new disciplines, which, you know, haven't, you know, for whatever drug development or diagnostics, whatever, they really haven't been around very long. But I would say I think it's extremely refreshing that you're thinking about, okay, we need to not only work on this stuff here with these collaborators, but we got to prepare this next generation coming along so they exist and they can do the next generation of what's happening. Talk a little bit about this relationship, if you would, at the university. I think it's the Dalai Lama School of Public Health at University of Toronto.
Absolutely. So we have a phenomenal general manager, and his name is Ronnie Miller, and he's been an inspiration to the Canadian affiliate in terms of being progressive and being a visionary. And part of him stepping down from Innovative Medicines Canada as a chair is to essentially create a scholarship within a particular domain. And due to the initiatives that we had created around population health and our AI COE initiatives in open science, we thought that IMC's scholarship alongside with Roche's money to match would be something that we could contribute to the new generation in being able to participate in applied science, really growing that domain, not just being able to come up with the sharpest algorithms that are possible from a scientific rigor perspective, but also being able to consider where they could place those algorithms for maximal impact in terms of patient benefit. And so we're working with the School of Public Health in a very cohesive manner to identify use cases that would be able to create patient benefit in the near term that are along the lines of our business objectives, but also reflective of our market needs. And so it's a catalyst to create these forums between academics and ourselves, and to be able to grow the world of translation and implementation in a very real way. And I think something that is notable within these programs is that, I think there's a bit of a push and pull, or a little bit of a war in terms of competing for the best scientists that come out of Canada. And I think, at a certain point in your life, you kind of have to make a decision on where you want to contribute. And we're finding that a lot of scientists want to contribute in a way where they feel like they're interacting with the ecosystem. They want to talk to patients. They want to talk to physicians. They want to talk to policymakers, and they want to be able to have that really, beautiful streamlined feedback between these stakeholders and the research, such that they can iterate and discover at a faster rate. And so, part of what we're building is called citizen-led science. And it really is about taking those discoveries as they happen and sharing it back to the patients and other stakeholders within, a common language, such that they can inform even further research. So it's something that we're definitely pushing forward and hoping to expedite discovery with.
Very cool. Very cool indeed. Fanny, looking out now in the coming years, we chatted a little bit before the show about sort of, we talk about themes like AI, the stuff that is realistic today versus the stuff that's more moonshot, unicorn style. But nonetheless, I'd love to get your visions on some of these things. Once again, looking back at Roche for a minute, you are a pharma and a diagnostics company. And if we could just sort of start on the pharma side of things, I think most people listening and watching the show know that, pharma, it's expensive to develop a new drug, discovery, expensive, non-human development, very expensive, and then obviously clinical development, extremely expensive. We've seen a lot of activity, had some guests on the show that are mainly looking at artificial intelligence and the early discovery phase on how we can optimize molecules and things like that. Where do you think we're headed in the next, say, 5-10 years with regard to sort of this just general in silico theme for drug development? Are we ever going to get to a point where, we don't want 5,000 patients in our study, we might have 2,000 patients and 3,000 virtual patients? Or where are we headed with, in your opinion, with drug development overall and artificial intelligence tools?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, because I think the question that we always ask ourselves in drug discovery is, what is the pipeline and how long will it take this particular drug to end up reaching the market? And it's a long path, which is, over a decade and sometimes in the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars.
Yep.
There's a lot of risk as we move through the pipeline, but we're finding that with all of the new discoveries within AI or in silico modeling, we're able to do a lot before we actually hit the lab. So what was not cost efficient before may actually be cost efficient now. So artificial intelligence has the potential of making drug discovery cheaper in areas where there may not have been, let's say, the upside that we were looking for. So let's say in rare condition, if you're an investor strictly looking at it from an investor perspective, it's like you have a drug in oncology and you have a drug in rare condition. Your market might be a little bit or much larger, let's say in the oncology space. Rare condition right now might be in equally important and a viable opportunity where it wasn't years before. And so that's what I see in terms of being a positive addition to drug discovery. And I'm finding that drug discovery itself is really about coordinating a lot of these companies. Often these in silico model companies represent one feature of maybe a larger pipeline before it actually hits the laboratory. So now what we're finding too is that companies are coordinating with one another such that they can pipeline to one another in order to make their outputs a more fulsome package for receptors such as ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Same question on the diagnostics front, because obviously, once again, diagnostics, it can be that CAT scan, PET scan, whatever in the hospital. It can also be this little wearable thing now that I have on my wrist. A little bit of your visions in terms of where we're going with artificial intelligence and enhancing the diagnostic process, but also maybe thinking about some of this consumer-facing applications of artificial intelligence. Take us out a little bit there, if you would.
I think diagnostics is particularly interesting because it places access to healthcare and insights in the hands of consumers. You don't no longer have to go to like a formal hospital or a community center such that you can get a device to read one of your vital signs or something that you're probing or interrogating because you're not feeling well, and having somebody tell you, whether something is potentially wrong or something needs to be investigated. And I think that in itself is super interesting. I think, from a decision enhancement or clinical decision support perspective, I think AI will always be in combination with a human who sits and is able to take a holistic view as well of the patient and be able to provide decision making at, the point where a treatment might be necessary, but there might be some additional indicators or biomarkers that can be tracked pre-diagnosis in more the preventative space, such that we can get to these patients before they get to a complicated state and it gets more difficult to treat. And so I see us shifting our treatments or even lifestyle changes further upstream and hoping to minimize the volume of complex cases downstream. And I think that's very positive. I think areas to look out for, of course, are computer vision. We've always been talking about radiology and looking at imaging biomarkers. But now I think in moving upstream a little bit more, it's, natural language processing and being able to comb EMRs and identify interesting biomarkers in unstructured notes that weren't necessarily looked at quantitatively from a population level. I think that's really interesting. I think there's, massive advantages or massive progressions in multiomics, combining a series of different data sets that weren't necessarily combined quantitatively and identifying biomarkers that could lead us to more predictive modeling of who's at risk for being more complicated or who would have a better outcome using a very specific type of medication or treatment. So I definitely see that moving there, but I still very much from a health equity standpoint see it being digital is about access. Digital is about democratizing healthcare, and I still see that vision very much encompassing the tactics that I just described.
Outstanding. Fanny, I know you were, I guess a little bit before the pandemic, you were on the conference circuit quite a bit talking about AI in healthcare and AI in drug discovery. We're coming out of this quite soon, but what does 2022 hold for you? Any other big announcements that you can talk about? Any scoops you can give us? And where can we watch you over the next year? Presentations, conferences, and so forth you're going to be presenting at?
So I would say look out for us in the neurodegeneration, rare condition space, as well as in oncology, and there's some active work in engaging patient advocacy groups and really putting the patient or the citizen at the heart of the work that we do. Not only just as a unidirectional here's my data type of interaction, but more in that bidirectional, let's solution together and bring other stakeholders with us. So that includes, scientists, clinicians, regulatory, reimbursement, other tech companies. And so we will be continuing that model. We will be doing a call for proposals to to different countries around the world in a more global effort. So to really elevate Canada and its capabilities, but also leveraging Canadian capabilities across the globe to other countries, and being able to build that bi-directional communication from other countries to us so we can all learn. So you're going to see a lot of for good efforts. And the other thing too is you can always reach us at aiwithroche.com.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any ideas that you think might be impactful and you would like to work with us, we're happy to ideate with you. And we recognize we don't have all the answers, but we have the commitment to find them.
I was going to ask you that, but we'll put that link in the bio as well, because I think, obviously we think of the pharma industry partnering with sort of early stage drug discovery companies, but now, you're obviously doing so much on all these fronts. So it's nice to see that a company like Roche and what you represent sort of on the global scene is able to work with the startup innovators, the university labs, and so forth as well for these new ideas. So we will definitely put that link as well in the bio. Fanny, this was really fascinating. I'm thrilled at what you're doing. Really going to be rooting you on and watching in the coming years as you continue to build this out. For everybody that is going to be listening to this episode across the different podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Fanny C, One Roche, head of artificial intelligence and digital health, Hoffmann-La, really working on cutting edge innovation for these impactful and meaningful health system transformations, not just in pharma and diagnostics, but really across the board at all parts of the health value chain. Fanny, it was a pleasure seeing you and meeting you. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to do this. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing there. And as we like to say on this show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow through what you're doing. It's a really fascinating story.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was such a pleasure. And I'm so glad that there are people like you sending out the messages of all the goodness that's actually out there.
Thank you for that.